How many of you have seen the new Star Wars movie? I'm with you, girl. How many of you are going to see the new Star Wars movie? Yeah. So I have a little secret story to tell you about that. We used to have a minister whose name was David Walker. He was a big guy in our philosophy in the Centers for Spiritual Living, and he ran into George Lucas in a theater lobby right after the New York Times had run a photo of George Lucas and his son standing in front of a bookcase, and guess what was right in the middle of the bookcase? The Science of Mind, our textbook, The Science of Mind by Dr. Ernest Holmes. And Dr. Walker mentioned it to George Lucas, and the person that Lucas was with said, "You remember that book I gave you by Ernest Holmes?" And Lucas said, "Where do you think the Force came from?" So may the Force be with you all. So tomorrow, just before midnight, is the winter solstice. It's the point when the night is longest and the day is shortest, and after that, each day gets a tiny little bit longer, and the night gets a little bit shorter. Can I get an amen? Solstice is celebrated, of course, as the return of the light of the sun. A couple of days later, we celebrate the birth of a different kind of light, the light of the Christ consciousness. And a little while ago was the Jewish holiday of Hanukkah, which celebrates a miracle when there was enough oil to keep the light in the temple at Jerusalem going for far longer than anyone expected after the temple had been rededicated after its destruction. See, in the middle of the darkest winter, we celebrate these holidays of light, and they're deep and rich and archetypal for us. For obvious reasons, first, we depend upon light. There's nothing on earth that could survive without the light of the sun. So it sort of makes sense that the earliest humans would figure out a way to commemorate and notice where the light was and the fact that it was coming back. There's another reason, and that is because while we're in this human body, it's incredibly easy to get bogged down, to get stuck in the day-to-day, to get hypnotized, if you will, by what's happening around us and think that that's the truth. And we kind of get ground down. And so in the middle of the darkest days, we have these holidays to remind us that light is born even then, even in the dark days. But there's a deeper message to these holiday celebrations that speaks to something at our very core. And that's what I want to talk about today. It speaks to that place in us that knows that we are always evolving toward the greater, that we're always moving toward the consciousness of being one with God, Spirit, the universe, whatever you call it, whatever name you choose to signify that mystery that lies behind, the thing that created this consciousness that's the ground of our very being. And so the oldest of the holidays, of course, is the winter solstice. And Stonehenge and Newgrange were built like 3000 BC, somewhere around in there, to mark and commemorate it. But the holiday had been celebrated for thousands of years before that. Some say as long as 30,000 years ago is the first evidence of a solstice commemoration. And the Hanukkah miracle comes from around 165 before the Common Era. And the most recent story, the Christmas story, it goes from outer to inner. It makes sense. First, there's this focus on light that we know we have to grow crops and to make it, the weather happen and all that kind of stuff. It brings life to the earth. And second is a commemoration of a God out there that sends miracles to help the people. And the third, the message of Jesus, I think, the Christmas story I believe in is a story about the birth of God consciousness in human beings, in each one of us. I think that's the truth that Jesus wanted people to realize, is that the kingdom of heaven is within, and the consciousness of spirit is within, and so now we're ready to bring it out. We talked last week about what comes before the birth of this idea: pregnancy, right? Morning sickness, despair, and discomfort, all those kinds of things. And we talked about being doulas for each other, pregnancy and birth friends for each other. And so today I want to talk more about the actual birth, the actual birthing process. This divine idea that's trying to be born inside of each one of us and through each one of us is something the mystics have talked about for hundreds of years or thousands of years. The rest of us just sort of had to catch up. We had to get to the place where we could allow it into our minds. And it's been a long road, right? From Father out there to Creator in here. And still, I remember in my early days that there would be a little voice calling, "Heretic," every time I thought about it, right? Expecting the bolt from the sky. And it took a while to sort of get over those old ideas. But I think in a really huge sense, we're standing on the threshold of giving birth to that consciousness, that we've evolved sufficiently to actually take that step. One of the things that had to happen is something that we at Centers for Spiritual Living have been talking about for 100 years. Sometimes that lone voice in the dark, but now it's everywhere. And that idea is that you can change your thoughts and therefore change your beliefs and therefore change your perceptions and your whole experience of life. That we could actually become different people than we found ourselves to be, that we could choose a different way. Now it's not a secret, it's everywhere. But here's the thing. Few of us practice that often enough to get to the real fruit that it will bring us, which is, as in our founder Ernest Holmes' words, the faith of God. Not faith in God, but the faith of God. We know and have known for centuries, because the mystics knew it first, that the cosmos is a single whole, a unit. And few of us live that way. We live as though we're separate, right? We know and have heard from the mystics for centuries that love is the impulsion of the universe and that it works according to certain principles and laws. We know that, we've heard it. Problem is that most of us live ruled by fear, reaction, negative emotion, instead of living from love in everything that we do. This is an Ernest Holmes quote that I just found that I really enjoyed. He said, "One cannot be a good student of the science of mind and spirit who is filled with fear and confusion. He must keep himself or herself in a state of equilibrium, in a state of poise, peace, and confidence, in a state of spiritual understanding. The belief in goodness must be greater than any apparent manifestation of its opposite." In other words, we got to walk our talk. We got to walk our talk, right? That's the threshold we stand on. Can we start preparing for a world that works for everyone? Did you notice the banner when you walked in the door? That's next year's theme. Can we start preparing for peace and stop preparing for war? Can we stop allowing fear to run our lives and instead make way for life from love? Can we start to care for and nurture and live from that vision of a world that works for everyone? Or shall we continue to stare at the problems of the world in horror? That's the threshold we stand on. I don't know about you, but I'm ready. I am so ready to let everything I do come from love. I'm so ready to let my thoughts and actions be the basis for that kinder, more loving, more just world. I don't know, are you ready? Good, Good. Then the time has come to step off that precipice together. To step off that precipice and let go of the ideas of me and mine and more, and really learn to trust the universe and its creator, that which lives within us, to melt into it, to let ourselves be a divine idea whose time has finally come. To let ourselves be that divine idea. And there's no real map for it. I wish I had one. I wish I could say, okay, it's this way, and then turn left. But every one of us brings where we've already been. And so it's an individual inside job for every one of us. All I can do is give you some practices that will keep your feet nearer the path and some landmarks to look for along the way. And some we talked about last week. One of them is hanging out with your doulas, right? We hang out with each other so that when we want to stop giving birth, there's someone to say, come on, you can do it. Push a little harder. Take another step. We hang out with our doulas, and we learn about meditation and silence and study and community. And then I come to the really big practices. The really vital first practice is real forgiveness of everything. Real forgiveness. And what I've learned through my long and lengthy practice of unforgiveness is this. I have learned that it really is easier to forgive than to hold on. It really, truly is. Our society teaches us that when we forgive, we're letting somebody off the hook. That's nonsense. It's just nonsense, because the person who suffers is the one who doesn't forgive. There's that great old saw that I just love. To refuse to forgive is like drinking poison and waiting for the other guy to die. Right? It really, truly is. Forgiveness is so essential. And what I found to be essential is to strip down all the layers where I haven't forgiven and just keep at it. Barbara Marx Hubbard just wrote a new book. It's called The Evolutionary Testament of Co-Creation. And in it she said, we can't cross the threshold. We can't enter that next stage of evolution until we're whole, until our wounds are healed. And that means until we've forgiven everything that has to be forgiven. She said, forgive, forgive, forgive every injury back until the day when Cain slew Abel, and then forgive Cain. He did not know what he did. He was like a child, hurt by his father unwittingly. We forgive all wrongs of the world as we forgive the acts of a child. So if you could use some help in that area, you might want to sign up for the class, The Eye and the Four Agreements, because the first half of it, The Eye of the Storm, is all about forgiveness and a big focus on forgiving ourselves, which we got to do, right? We're part of that all. We got to do that too. When we live from an expanded consciousness, what we have to do is learn to forgive undeveloped consciousness, so to speak. We have to learn to forgive it, because otherwise we're in a state of war, right? What forgiveness does is put us back in that position of being for something and against nothing. And that's the place of constant willingness to forgive. To be willing to forgive whatever happens. And from there, we come to the real landmark, and that is the practice of what Barbara Marx Hubbard calls initiatory love. Initiatory love is choosing to love everybody and everything, no matter what. It is love as a state of being. Love as a state of being, not dependent on what the object of our love does. Embodied love. But our culture tells us that we give love to people who deserve it, right? Jesus said, love everyone, particularly those who don't deserve it, right? Like tax collectors and prostitutes and people like that. The people who were at the bottom rung, he said, I love those. Jesus was the embodiment of initiatory love. This kind of love recognizes that any attack is either fear, an expression of fear, or a childish request for love. A childish request for love. And so the response to an attack is initiatory, proactive love. And that gives a certain kind of strength that is rare. It's not seen too often, but that kind of strength prevents the damage and the destruction and invites constructive action to happen, right? If we don't react, but instead respond from this kind of love, we're remembering that central idea that really all is one. And how can there be an attack when there's only one of us? There can only be one cell that is sick and saying, I need some help over here, right? An inflammation, so to speak. And initiatory love is the thing that neutralizes that. It will always prevent us from doing harm to others, because when we choose love, we are required to choose constructive acts and words, constructive way of being. The other thing about it is, because love is the propulsion of the universe, it lifts us up into that place of amazing creative power, where we inspire those who live in fear, just because of who we are, where we inspire those who live in fear, and where the beauty and the grace and the joy and the power of our words and our acts elevates them. It does require us to stand in a certain position and feel where other people are coming from and know that those who cannot accept our offer of love may be like those cells that are too sick to go on, and they'll fade away. They will, because the impulsion of the universe is love. That is the evolutionary impulse we're all riding on. And so there will be certain people who are just not able to stand it. People who can't step off that precipice. But if you and you and you and you and you and me all start living from initiatory love, from a choice of love, we start performing miracles. We do. Being love converts pessimists. It soothes the sick in heart. It teaches others to anticipate the good rather than stare at the bad. You know, you've all been there, we have all been there, stuck with a problem and staring at it until something wakes us up and says, don't look that way anymore. Look at what it is you want the solution to be. Stop wasting all your energy over there. We start to invite people to do that simply because of who we are. And as these acts begin to spread and as the world becomes a more loving place, we start to transform despair into hope. And we start to activate that power in each other. And we become synergistic, and the love starts to grow until it spreads over the whole face of the earth. Things unlike it begin to drop away. Things that are not like love. And so the final thing I want to talk about for a moment is this practice of seeking synergy. Seeking the people who are like us. Seeking the people, you know, our society teaches us to be scrappy and pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. But we're starting to realize that whether or not we have bootstraps might be a result of when and where we're born, to whom we're born. And that the big picture is that no matter who has bootstraps and who doesn't, what matters is that we are all lifted up, that we are all lifted up. And so when our intention is to seek synergy in achieving our personal dreams, our personal, this thing that's calling us into a greater yet to be, when we start to find the other people who are seeking to do the same thing, energy starts to build and magic happens. We start to understand that since we're all cells of one body, for some to win and others to lose means we all lose, right? Because there is a way we can all win. There is. We understand that when we join together in consciousness, what we already know to be true, that we're all one. When we include the ones we used to call enemy in the circle of this loving synergy, then everyone's gifts get put to work for the betterment of the whole. And nobody is wasted. Nobody is missed. No good idea falls away because there's no support for it. We begin to support each other. So when we look for those who are seeking to fulfill the highest desires of their being, synergy happens and miracles start to happen. And we start to create a new world. We can't do it. It can't happen any other way. So when we walk with those people, our people, if you will, we start to recognize each other as ourselves, and others start to recognize us as themselves. And obstacles simply start to fall away. The banner is because our whole theme next year is a world that works for everyone. And we are part of, there's over 100 centers across the world who are going to be participating, and more coming in every day in this theme. And we're going to talk about our individual roles. We're going to talk about the roles of our centers. We're going to talk about our roles in the greater community, the role that we have, and the role of spirituality itself in creating a new world that works for everyone. But right now it is time to take that very first step. The story of Christmas is all about, and that very first step is just to become willing to acknowledge that there's something in us seeking to break out of the boxes, seeking to break out of the old idea that there's a them and an us, that there could ever be an enemy, seeking to break out of the idea that there is something we cannot ever forgive, seeking to break out of the idea that we are small and isolated and alone, seeking to break into this idea of letting the divinity in us be our lives, letting the choice we make every moment be to live from love, letting the choice be to see each other as part of the whole, part of the one, recognizing each other in ourselves and vice versa, and lifting up the whole. So I want to close with another quote from Ernest Holmes. If you will take time daily to sense the presence of life within you, to believe in it, to accept it, it will not be long before the life which you have known will gradually disappear, and something new will be born, a bigger, better, and more perfect you. You will pass from death into life, from lack and want into greater freedom, from fear into faith. From a sense of being alone, you will pass into a realization of oneness with everything, and you will rejoice in this oneness. So the day to step over that threshold is today. The date to rejoice is here. The voice of your highest state of being is calling you, and the time to create that new world, that world that works for everyone, is now. So let's join together in consciousness. And remember that there is only one. There's only one life. There's only one mind. There is only this vast ground of consciousness, the ground of our being, the ground of all being. This creative power that we call God, that goes by 10,000 names, is all there is. There's nothing in opposition to it. There's nothing outside of it. Which means that I am part of it. Which means that every single one of us is in and of this body of the one. So that wherever we look, we see the face of God in each other, in the trees and flowers, in the animals, in the planet itself, in the universe. It's all God. And knowing that, I know that right where I am, it is in its fullness. That right where each one of us is, God is present in its fullness. And as we allow that to grow within us, that awareness and knowing, as we allow it to grow within us, our old lives disappear and new lives come into being. our old ways of thinking disappear, and enormous, new, wonderful ways of thinking come into our lives. Fear disappears as we stand for love. And love leads the way to freedom, to faith, to peace, to joy, to happiness, to abundance. Love leads the way to that world that works for all life, for every single one of us. And as this is our vision, I know that today there is a seed planted within each one of us that is now, as we speak, sending down roots and putting out shoots and unfurling leaves, and that will continue to grow and blossom and bear fruit as our very lives, lives of love, lives lived from love, lives lived as beings of love. And I know that because of this, that change in the world, in our outer circumstances, must follow. And knowing this and seeing it clearly, I say thank you. I give thanks for this community and all that it is and all that it does and all that it represents in our world, in our universe. I give thanks for every person in it and the love and wisdom and intelligence and creativity that each one brings. I give thanks for this amazing adventure called life and for all the doulas that I have had and will continue to have. And I say that for each one of us. Thank you, thank you. And I release these words knowing they're already so. The universe has already said yes to them. And so we say together, and so it is.